I should have guessed it was you."
The voice came from behind, sharp with indignation. Revan rose from his chair and turned to face the speaker. She wore the traditional robes of a Jedi Archivist, though Revan knew she was in fact a Jedi Master. She was young for the position, about Bastula's age, but her hair was platinum white. She had cold blue eyes and a pale complexion that spoke of a life spent inside the Archives, well sheltered from the rays of the sun. "Atris," Revan said with a nod and a forced smile, silently cursing. Once a close friend of Meetra's, Atris had refused to join those who had gone to battle the Mandalorians. A staunch traditionalist, she had shared the unfavorable opinion of Revan coming to the older, more conservative masters. Of all the people who could have interrupted his search, he could think of few he wanted to encounter less.
"Still trying to recapture your lost memories?"
she asked a little too smugly. And Revan understood that her arrival was no accident. Atris must have tagged the report he'd been reading, so it would alert her whenever it was referenced. There were no rules or regulations against this kind of security feature, but it was rarely done. As a rule, those who served the Council of First Knowledge respected the right to personal privacy of Jedi visiting the Temple Archives. Yet even though Revan had sought to keep his investigations private, he had done nothing wrong, and he still needed answers. "This report seems to skim over some of the relevant details," he said. "Shoddy work," he added on a sudden hunch. He saw Atris bristle, and he knew he'd guessed right. Not only had she tagged the report, she'd also prepared it.
"Maybe you just can't see the obvious truth in front of you," she snapped.
Revan smiled. Despite all the Jedi teachings about peace and serenity, he'd always had a knack for riling up overly sanctimonious members of the Order like Atris. "Guess I just need your great wisdom to help me understand what I'm missing."
"What makes you think I would do anything to help you?"
"I'm still a Jedi, and Meetra's sentence is a matter of record," he reminded her, suddenly serious. "I have a right to know the truth of what happened. All of it."
"What more is there to tell? She made the mistake of following you. You led her down the path to the dark side. She committed an unforgivable act, and for this the Council banished her."
"It was a desperate act during a desperate time," Revan said. "And the mass shadow generator was an experimental prototype. How could the Council be sure Meetra even knew what would happen? What if it was all a mistake? A terrible accident?"
"The mass shadow generator was a weapon of war,"
Atris replied with a cool, rational calm.
"Its sole purpose was death and destruction, and she gave the order to activate it. How is that an accident?"
"But she obviously regretted her actions, and she surrendered voluntarily to the Council. Why wouldn't they show her mercy?"
"They needed to make an example of her."
Atris made no effort to hide the bitterness in her voice.
"She became a symbol for all those who had defied the will of the Council. Mercy was not an option."
"It can't be that simple," Revan pressed. "My crimes were far worse, yet the Council gave me a second chance."
"You could still be of use to us."
Revan sensed there was something she wasn't saying. What does that mean? Meetra was a powerful Jedi. Why didn't the Council try to redeem her? The Archivist shook her head in disbelief.
"You really have no idea what you did to her, do you?"
"No, I don't," Revan snapped, allowing his frustration to bubble over. "My memory has more holes in it than a Kaminoan sponge, so why don't you just tell me?" Atris bit her lower lip and glared at him. Then, perhaps realizing that answering his questions was the quickest way to get him to leave, she began to speak.
"Meetra was much closer to the mass shadow generator than you were. She felt the shockwave. It nearly killed her, left her vulnerable. At the same time, she felt the deaths of the Mandalorians and her fellow soldiers through the Force. It was all too much to bear in her weakened state. It would have killed her.
She paused for emphasis before continuing.
Instinctively, she protected herself the only way she knew how. She cut herself off from the Force. Permanently.
I'm sorry, Revan said sincerely. I had no idea.
Really?
Atris replied angrily.
Then why did you and Malak leave her behind when you went into the unknown regions? You realized she was of no further use to you, and you abandoned her. That's why she came back to the Order to face judgment.
I didn't see that in your report. Is that fact or just speculation? Her refusal to speak was reply enough. Even if what you say is true, Revan continued, I'm not the same man anymore. Is it right to still hold me accountable for those crimes?
A Chalarax can't change its spots,
she muttered under her breath. Revan was too busy trying to process all he had learned to react to her comment. If Meetra was cut off from the Force, that would explain why he hadn't been able to sense her presence. That meant she could still be alive somewhere. She might still know something that could help him understand the meaning of his vision. Do you know where she went? He asked. I need to speak with her.
Haven't you done enough already?
Atris demanded.
It's your fault she defied the Council and betrayed the Order. It's your fault she fell to the dark side and was branded the Exile. It's your fault she cut herself off from the Force. For a Jedi, that's a fate worse than death.
I've come closer to death than most, Revan countered. And I can assure you that's not true. Atris snorted in contempt.
That is the difference between us. I live for the Force. You live for yourself.
Revan shrugged, knowing a philosophical argument wasn't going to get him any closer to finding Meetra. Whatever you think of me, he said, I did not compel Meetra into any of this. She made her own choices, and it should be her decision now if she wants to speak to me again, not yours. If you know where she is, you have to tell me.
I haven't spoken to her since her trial,
Atris answered through gritted teeth, and Revan knew she was telling the truth.
I do not know where she went, and I hope I never see her again. The Exile betrayed the Order, as did you. You're not welcome here. Go back home to your wife.
Atris spoke the last word with such venom she nearly choked on it. Revan said, wagging his finger at her. There is no emotion. There is peace. Her lip curled up in a snarl, and she spun on her heel and stormed out of the room. Revan waited until the sound of her feet on the stairs faded, then sat slowly back down in the chair. With Atris gone, he could let his sarcastic mask slip. Despite what he'd said to her, he couldn't help but feel responsible for Meetra. He'd refused to give Atris the satisfaction of seeing his guilt and grief, but now that he was alone, the emotions came flooding to the surface. Most of his specific memories of Meetra were gone. He could recall only disjointed bits and pieces, but she had once been one of his closest friends, and he still felt a powerful emotional connection to her. Slumping forward, he buried his face in his hands. He expected tears to follow, but that didn't happen. Instead, he just felt a hollow, numbing sorrow. After several minutes, he took a deep breath to collect himself and rose to his feet. Then he headed out the Archives door and down the stairs. He'd come to the temple in search of an old friend and confidant, hoping she could help him understand the dreams that plagued his nights. Instead, he'd found a dead end and learned the grim truth about the one they called the Exile. No wonder I never come here anymore, he grumbled under his breath as he made his way across the courtyard and headed for the exit.